The studio lights were bright, as always, casting a warm glow across the set. The usual hum of the production crew buzzed in the background, but today, it felt distant, almost surreal. I stood just off camera, watching Kate. She sat at the anchor desk, smiling that perfect smile that had captivated millions. It was a smile I had fallen for years ago. But now, all I could see was the lie behind it. My heart pounded in my chest, not from nerves, but from anger. The betrayal that had gnawed at me for weeks was now boiling over. And I knew I couldn't keep it inside any longer. I had seen it with my own eyes. There was no denying what she had done. I had watched the footage over and over, hoping each time that it was some mistake, a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. The security cameras don't lie. It was late one night when I made the discovery. I had been tossing and turning in bed, Kate's absence next to me heavier than usual. She'd been staying late at the studio more often, claiming she needed to prepare for some special segments. I didn't think much of it at first, we were both in the same business. Early mornings, late nights, it was part of the job. But something had changed. She had changed. Unable to sleep, I picked up my phone and opened the app that let me access the studio's security cameras remotely. It was something I'd done 100 times before, just to check on the place. But that night, something pushed me to check the footage of the previous day. And that's when I saw it. Kate and Lucas. I couldn't believe it at first. It was like watching a nightmare unfold. There they were, in a dark corner of the studio, thinking they were hidden from view, locked in a passionate kiss. My stomach churned as the realization hit me. The woman I loved, my wife, had been lying to me, sneaking around with Lucas, our hotshot field reporter. The rage was instant, but the shock kept me from acting immediately. Instead, I let it fester. I needed a plan, something bigger than just confronting her. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling, publicly. Painfully. In the world of TV, reputation is everything, and Kate has always been obsessed with hers. She had built a career on being America's sweetheart, the charming, trustworthy face of morning news. But now, I was going to show everyone who she really was. That's when the idea came to me. I wouldn't confront her in private. No, that would be too easy. Too kind. I would do it in front of everyone, live, on air, where there would be no escape, no way to deny what she had done. The cameras that had once been her stage would now be her undoing. As I stood there, watching her from behind the scenes, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction knowing what was about to happen. She had no idea. Today's segment was supposed to be about honesty in relationships. How fitting. She didn't know that in just a few minutes, I was going to flip the script. 5 minutes to air, the floor director called out. Kate caught my eye and smiled, a warm, loving smile that used to make my heart skip a beat. Now, it only made me sick. I nodded back, forcing a smile. My heart pounded harder, my hands slick with sweat, but I kept my cool. The video was ready. The footage of her and Lucas would air during the live segment, right when she started talking about trust and honesty. It was going to be perfect. For a moment, I wondered if I was going too far. Maybe there was a way back from this. Maybe she could explain and apologize, and we could work through it. But then I remembered the look in their eyes in that footage, the way she kissed him like she had once kissed me. No, there was no going back. 3 minutes, the floor director called again. My heart raced. Soon, the world would see Kate's betrayal. Soon, everyone would know the truth. And I would finally have my revenge. The red light on the camera blinked to life as the show went live. Kate's voice came through crisp and confident as if everything in her world was perfectly in place. She welcomed our audience with that same familiar charm, the one that had made her a household name. But I knew the truth. And in a matter of minutes, so would everyone else. Good morning, America, Kate said, her voice smooth and professional, as always. Today, we're diving deep into the topic of honesty in relationships. How do you build trust? How do you keep it strong? And what happens when that trust is broken? She glanced at me, giving me a rehearsed smile, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. I was standing off camera, waiting for my cue. My heart was pounding, but my resolve was stronger than ever. The footage was ready to roll. I had already worked with the tech team under the guise of setting up a special segment, ensuring that no one but me knew what was coming. Lucas, the man I now despised more than anything, was off on another assignment this morning. I'd made sure of that, too. I didn't need him in the studio when the bomb dropped. No, this moment was for Kate. She was going to feel the full weight of her betrayal. Kate continued, seemingly unaware of the storm brewing. We've brought in a few experts to discuss the importance of transparency in relationships. But before we do that, Josh has a special segment prepared for us. Isn't that right, Josh? She turned to me, her blue eyes sparkling with the same enthusiasm that once captivated me. But now, I saw only lies. I forced a smile, stepping into the shot. The camera panned to me, and I could feel the eyes of millions watching from their homes. This was it. No turning back now. Thanks, Kate, I began, my voice steady, though the adrenaline was surging through me. You know, when we talk about honesty, it's not just something we discuss here on the show. It's something that affects all of us personally. Today, I wanted to share a story, a personal story, about what happens when honesty and trust are shattered. I saw Kate's smile falter for a fraction of a second, confusion flickering in her eyes. She had no idea what was coming, but she could sense something wasn't right. I prepared a special video, I continued, my gaze locked on her now, that shows what happens behind the scenes when the trust we hold dear is broken. Roll the tape. The control room hesitated for a moment, unsure of what I was talking about, but they followed my lead. The screen behind us flickered, and the familiar footage from the studio's security cameras filled the screen. At first, it was just an empty studio, harmless, unassuming. But then, the image changed. There, in the corner of the screen, was Kate and Lucas. They were standing close, too close for colleagues. The angle wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I heard the gasps from the crew around us before I even looked at Kate. Her face had gone pale, her confident smile vanishing in an instant. She stared at the screen, frozen as if her mind couldn't process what was happening. The video continued, showing exactly what I had seen that night, the kiss. The unmistakable, damning kiss that sealed their betrayal. Kate's hands shot to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She turned to me, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. Josh, what is this? She stammered, her professional facade cracking. Her voice barely a whisper. I didn't flinch. I had rehearsed this moment in my head over and over. I had been waiting for this, and now it was unfolding exactly as I had planned. This is the truth, Kate, I said, my voice calm, but cold. The truth you've been hiding. Her hands dropped to her sides, and she looked around as if searching for a way out. But there was no escape. The camera was still rolling, capturing every second of her shame. The live audience was watching. Millions of people were watching. The silence in the studio was suffocating. Kate was trembling now, her hands shaking as she tried to find the words to explain. But there was nothing she could say. The damage was done. The truth was out. The video cut off abruptly, and the screen went black. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. Kate stood there, broken, exposed in a way she had never imagined. The woman who had always prided herself on being in control, on being perfect, was now at the mercy of her own lies. I stepped away from the camera, leaving her standing there in the harsh studio lights, unable to hide from what she had done. She turned to me, tears brimming in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. Why? She whispered, her voice cracking. But I didn't answer. Instead, I looked directly into the camera and spoke to the audience, my tone final. This is what happens when you betray the trust of the people who care about you. Let this be a reminder. Honesty always comes out in the end. The red light on the camera blinked off, and the silence was deafening. The moment the camera light blinked off, the studio exploded into chaos. Producers rushed in from behind the scenes, crew members whispered furiously, and Kate, my wife, just stood there, numb, as if the world had shifted under her feet. Her hands shook as she tried to steady herself, but there was no saving face anymore. She looked small, defeated, like the woman she had always hidden from the public. I watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. This was the moment I had been building toward for weeks, planning every second of it, but now that it was over, I felt nothing. No relief, no victory. Just emptiness. Kate finally turned to me, her face pale and tear-streaked. Josh? Her voice was so quiet I barely heard it. How could you do this? I met her gaze, my heart cold as stone. How could you? I fired back. You destroyed us, Kate. You ruined everything. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to plead, but the words didn't come. Her lips quivered, and for the first time since I'd met her, she seemed utterly lost. There were no clever lines, no polished responses. Just silence and shame. The crew continued to move around us, but I didn't care. We were both professionals, we'd both seen scandals rock the media world before, but this one was personal. The public would eat it up. Morning talk shows, gossip sites, social media, Kate's betrayal would be the headline everywhere by lunchtime. I had made sure of that. "Josh, we need to talk," Kate finally managed, her voice trembling with desperation. "Not here. Please, we can fix this." "Fix this?" I echoed, my voice filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. "You think we can fix this?" I gestured to the empty studio, the lingering tension from the fallout still thick in the air. "You lied to me. You cheated. On me, with him." I spat out Lucas's name like it was poison. There's no coming back from that. I could see the realization hit her, the sinking feeling in her gut as the weight of her actions truly settled. She had always been a master at controlling the narrative, but this time, there was nothing she could say to rewrite the story. Her perfect life had unraveled in front of millions of viewers, and there was no spinning this in her favor. One of the producers approached us cautiously, her voice low, trying to keep things professional despite the chaos. "Josh, Kate, we need to clear the set. We're cutting to a commercial break. We can finish this segment tomorrow." Kate barely nodded, but I didn't wait for her. I turned and walked off the set, the lights fading behind me as I headed toward the dressing rooms. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, but all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. It was over. The show, the marriage, everything. When I reached my dressing room, I slammed the door behind me and collapsed onto the couch, the adrenaline finally draining from my body. I stared at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't how I'd imagined it. I thought I'd feel triumphant like I'd won some twisted game. But now that it was done, all I felt was hollow. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I didn't answer at first, but the knock came again, more insistent. With a heavy sigh, I pushed myself up and opened the door. It was Lucas. The sight of him made my blood boil. He stood there, his face tight with anger and guilt, but he didn't cower. If anything, he looked ready for a fight. "What the hell, Josh?" he growled, stepping closer. "You didn't need to drag this into the public. You could have handled it privately." "Privately?" I snapped, my fists clenching at my sides. "You think I owe you that? Do you think she deserves that after what you two did? Don't you dare stand there and act like the victim, Lucas." He squared his shoulders, refusing to back down. "I'm not acting like a victim. But I didn't expect you to destroy her like that. You went too far." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Too far? Do you think I went too far? Maybe you should have thought about that before you kissed my wife in our studio. Before you made me look like a fool." He didn't say anything for a moment, the tension between us thick and heavy. But then his expression softened, and he looked at me with something that almost resembled pity. "This isn't going to fix anything, Josh," he said quietly. "Revenge never does." I stepped closer, my voice low and dangerous. "I don't want to fix anything, Lucas. I just wanted you both to feel what I felt." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway. The truth was, he was right. None of this would fix what was broken. The damage was done, and no amount of public humiliation or private apologies could undo what had happened. But I wasn't looking for a fix. I was looking for an end. I left the building without looking back. The cool morning air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it did nothing to clear the fog of emotions swirling inside me. The truth was out. The damage was done. And yet, as I stood on the sidewalk, watching the city move around me, I felt more lost than ever. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably already overflowing with messages, from producers, friends, and no doubt, journalists who'd already caught wind of the scandal. I ignored it. I didn't want to hear what anyone had to say. Not now. Instead, I walked. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I needed to move, to put distance between myself and the mess I had created. I had planned everything so carefully, imagining that this would be the moment I'd take control of my life again. But standing here now, I realized that all I had done was burn everything to the ground. There was no victory in that. I wandered for what felt like hours, the city's noise a distant hum in the background as my thoughts drowned it out. Kate's face kept flashing before me, her shock, her tears. She had betrayed me, there was no denying that, but in the end, I had delivered the final blow. I wondered what she was doing now, how she was picking up the pieces of the career I had shattered. A part of me wanted to know if she regretted it and if she would have done things differently, but the larger part of me didn't care. What was done was done. Eventually, I found myself at a small park, far from the studio, where no one would recognize me. I sat down on a bench, staring blankly at the trees, trying to sort through the mess in my head. My phone buzzed again, but this time, I took it out. There was a single message from an unknown number. "Josh, it's Kate. Please, let's talk. Just once." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. After everything that had happened, what could we possibly have left to say to each other? But something in me, maybe the part that still wanted closure, or maybe just the curiosity of what she could possibly say now, pushed me to reply. "Fine. Where?" Her answer came quickly. "Our place. Tonight." I put the phone back in my pocket, feeling a knot of tension in my chest. Our place, our apartment, where we'd built a life together, now felt more like a crime scene than a home. But if this was the final conversation, then I was going to face it. I needed to hear her side, if only to close this chapter of my life for good. That night, I walked through the door of our apartment for what felt like the last time. The place was quiet, too quiet, and the air felt heavy with all the things that had gone unsaid. Kate was sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes red from crying. She looked up when I entered. And for a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of the past few weeks hanging between us. "Thanks for coming," she said softly, her voice fragile. I didn't sit down. I wasn't here for comfort. "Say what you need to say, Kate." She nodded, taking a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to begin. "I don't even know where to start. I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable, but Josh, I never meant for it to get this far. I don't have an excuse, and I'm not asking you to forgive me. But I need you to understand." "Understand?" I repeated, my voice hard. "Understand what? That you cheated on me with Lucas? That you lied to my face every single day? What is there to understand, Kate?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. I had already seen her cry, and it didn't change anything. "I was lost," she said, her voice shaking. Everything was moving so fast, the show, the pressure, the expectations. I didn't know how to handle it. Lucas was just someone who listened, and who made me feel like I wasn't drowning. But I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. "Well, congratulations. You managed to do exactly that." She winced but didn't argue. Instead, she wiped her tears and continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I ruined us. I know there's no going back. But Josh, I loved you. I still do. What we had, it wasn't a lie." I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that what we'd built together hadn't been a complete sham. But the other part of me, the one who had seen the video of her and Lucas, couldn't let go of the betrayal. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice flat. "What do you want from me, Kate?" She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. "I don't know. I needed to say this. I needed you to hear me." Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. I could see the guilt eating her alive, but it wasn't enough to fix what was broken. Nothing could fix it. We were standing in the ruins of a life we had built together. And all that was left was rubble. "I heard you," I said finally, my voice cold. "But it doesn't change anything." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the truth was, she had made her choices, and I had made mine. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door, leaving her behind in the silence of the apartment that had once been our home. This time, I wasn't coming back. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing through the empty hallway. As I stood outside our apartment, I realized that the final thread tying me to Kate had been severed. There were no more secrets, no more lies. Just the aftermath of everything we had built crumbling to pieces. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something resembling clarity. The anger, the betrayal, it hadn't disappeared, but it had dulled, leaving a hollow sort of calm. I didn't look back as I walked away from the building, leaving behind the life I had known for years. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. And this time, I checked the screen. There were dozens of notifications, text messages from friends, a voicemail from one of the network executives, and emails from reporters looking for a comment. The story had exploded. As I expected, the media was devouring the scandal. Kate's image was already plastered across gossip sites, and Lucas's name was trending. The world couldn't get enough of their morning show hosts tearing each other apart. I scrolled through the messages with a numb sense of detachment. Everyone wanted a piece of the fallout, but I wasn't ready to engage. Not yet. I silenced my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I needed space, time to process. The city was alive around me, indifferent to the personal disaster that had just unfolded on live television. Cars honked, people rushed by, and somewhere, a street musician strummed a guitar. For the first time, I realized how much of my life had been consumed by the show and by my relationship with Kate. We had built a brand together, a public persona that people adored, but now that it was shattered, I had to figure out who I was without it. Without her, I walked aimlessly for hours, my thoughts drifting between the past and the uncertain future. Memories of the early days with Kate came rushing back, how we'd met, how we'd fallen in love in the chaos of the newsroom. We'd been a team once, partners, but somewhere along the way, we had lost sight of that. Maybe it had been the pressure of the show, or maybe it was something deeper. Something broken in both of us that we had ignored for too long. By the time I found myself at the edge of the park, the sun had begun to set, casting a golden glow over the city. I sat down on a bench and let out a long breath, feeling the weight of everything settle in. I didn't regret exposing Kate's betrayal. She had lied to me, and she had to face the consequences of her actions. But as I sat there, I realized that revenge hadn't brought me the closure I had hoped for. It had only left me with more questions, more emptiness. As the sky darkened, I thought about the future. What would happen next? The network would undoubtedly reach out, looking for damage control. They would want to spin this in a way that protected the brand, the show, and maybe even me. I knew how the game worked. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to play it anymore. I had been part of this machine for so long, smiling in front of the camera, delivering the news with the perfect blend of charm and authority. But after everything, it all felt meaningless. The scandal, the betrayal, it had peeled back the curtain on a life that I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from the network's head of PR. The subject line read, "Crisis Management Meeting Urgent." I stared at it for a moment, debating whether I should even open it. They would have a plan. They always did. Damage control is a finely tuned art in our world. But the truth was, I didn't know if I wanted to salvage any of this. I had thought that exposing Kate and Lucas would bring me some kind of resolution, but now, sitting here in the quiet park, I realized that what I needed wasn't revenge, it was a clean break. A chance to start over, to rebuild my life from the ground up, without the weight of this toxic, broken past. I stood up from the bench, feeling the cool breeze on my face as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon. I pulled out my phone, opened the email from the network, and hit delete. Then, one by one, I deleted the texts, the voicemails, and the messages from friends and colleagues, until my phone was silent again. As I walked away from the park, I felt lighter. There was no script for what came next, no camera following my every move. For the first time in years, I was in control of my own story. And whatever that story turned out to be, it would be mine, not something dictated by a producer or written for the public's consumption. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe I'd leave the show. Maybe I'd walk away from the industry entirely. But for now, I had the rest of the night ahead of me, and the possibility of something better waiting just beyond the horizon. The morning after my final walk from the apartment was unsettlingly quiet. No alarms, no rushing to the studio, no nervous energy over what stories we'd be presenting that day. For the first time in years, I didn't have a schedule to follow, and the sudden emptiness left me unsure of what to do. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, and stared out the window. The city was already in motion, but I was still. It felt like I had stepped off a train that had been speeding out of control for years. Now I was standing on the platform, watching it vanish into the distance. The reality was beginning to settle in. I had no job, no marriage, no plan. But there was also a strange sense of freedom in that. For so long, everything had been dictated by deadlines and appearances. Now, for the first time, I had a choice. I could choose what came next. The knock on the door broke me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened it and saw Claire, one of the senior producers from the show, standing there with a concerned expression, I felt a jolt of surprise. "Josh," she said softly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Claire had been one of the few people at the network who'd always treated me with respect, even when the show's pressures mounted. But now, seeing her here, I knew what she wanted. Damage control. They were already trying to pull the pieces together. Coffee? I asked, motioning to the pot on the counter. No, thanks, she said, sitting down at the table. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. Josh, the network's in chaos. After what happened yesterday, everyone's scrambling. They're trying to figure out how to handle the fallout. I nodded but didn't respond. I could imagine the scene. Executives in expensive suits sitting around a conference table, plotting how to save their precious brand from a scandal that was already spiraling out of control. They want to meet with you, Claire continued, her voice cautious. There's talk of rebranding the show, maybe bringing in a new co-host. They think if we spin this right, we can. I held up a hand, cutting her off. Claire, stop. I'm not coming back. She blinked, taken aback. Josh, I get that you're upset, but this isn't something we can just walk away from. Your career. My career is the last thing on my mind right now. I said firmly. I'm done with the show. I'm done with all of it. The words came out more easily than I expected. As soon as I said them, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't need the network's approval anymore. I didn't need the show to define me. I was done with that world. Claire stared at me, her brow furrowing. Are you sure? You've worked so hard to get here, Josh. This could be salvaged. I shook my head. There's nothing left to salvage. I'm not that guy anymore. Claire, whatever I was before, I'm not going back. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression softening. Okay, she said finally. I understand, but if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me. I nodded, grateful for her understanding. She stood up, gave me a sympathetic smile, and left, closing the door behind her. I sat back down, staring at the now lukewarm coffee in my hands. The decision was final. I wasn't going back to the studio, to the show, to the life that had slowly suffocated me. The next step would be on my terms. A week passed in quiet solitude. I avoided the news, shut down my social media, and ignored the persistent texts from colleagues and friends. The world was moving on without me, and for once, I was fine with that. I spent my days walking through the city, rediscovering the parts of it that I had missed while I was buried under the weight of my old life. It was on one of those walks that I found myself in front of a small cafe tucked away on a side street I rarely visited. The sign above the door read the press room, and the irony wasn't lost on me. But something about the place drew me in. Inside, it was cozy and unpretentious, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and the low hum of conversation. I ordered a drink and found a seat by the window, watching the people outside go about their day. It felt good to be anonymous, to blend in with the crowd. As I sat there, sipping my coffee, a man at the next table caught my attention. He was scribbling furiously in a notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. I couldn't help but glance at the page, and what I saw made me pause. He was writing a news article. Old-school journalism, longhand in a notebook, something I hadn't seen in years. Intrigued, I leaned over. You a writer? I asked, breaking the silence between us. The man looked up, surprised but not annoyed. He nodded. Yeah, freelance. Mostly investigative stuff. Keeps me busy. I raised an eyebrow. Investigative journalism? That's a dying art these days. He smiled, a wry look on his face. Tell me about it. Most people just want clickbait headlines now, but there are still stories worth digging into. Just got to find the right ones. I nodded, feeling a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. You work for anyone specific? Not really. I pitch to whoever's willing to publish. Sometimes it's a small independent outlet, sometimes a bigger publication picks it up. It's tough, but it's honest work. Honest work. The phrase stuck with me. For so long, my life had been about performance, about curating a persona for the public. But here was a guy doing the kind of journalism I'd once loved, the kind that got buried under the gloss of network television and corporate agendas. We talked for hours that day. His name was Ryan, and his stories of chasing down leads, uncovering corruption, and fighting to get the truth out reignited something in me that I thought had been lost forever. By the time I left the cafe, I knew what my next step would be. Over the following weeks, I started making calls, reaching out to old contacts, and exploring the idea of starting over, not as the polished anchor of a news show, but as a journalist again. The real kind. I had spent too many years trapped in the machinery of television, but now, I had the chance to return to something meaningful. I started small. I wrote a few pieces on local issues, submitted them to independent outlets, and slowly rebuilt my reputation from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay much, but it was real. For the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. The headlines about Kate and Lucas eventually faded. They moved on with their lives, and so did I. The world kept spinning, as it always does. But I no longer cared about the noise or the spotlight. I had found something better, a new beginning, on my own terms. And that, more than anything, was worth the cost. The months that followed were a blur of late-night writing, interviews with reluctant sources, and the thrill of chasing down stories that mattered. I wasn't back on camera, but I didn't need to be. The quiet satisfaction of seeing my byline attached to real investigative journalism brought a fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. My life had shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated, and I was grateful for it. I wasn't famous anymore, and I no longer had the steady paycheck that came with being a morning show anchor. But that was okay. My world had shrunk, and I liked it that way. Ryan and I teamed up on a few projects, taking on local corruption and underreported stories that the major networks ignored. We didn't do it for fame or recognition, we did it because it mattered. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own narrative. Then came the email that changed everything. It was late one evening when my phone buzzed. I had just finished a draft of a piece about housing corruption in the city when I noticed the name in my inbox. Jordan Matthews, a producer I had worked with back in my early days in broadcast journalism. We hadn't spoken in years. The subject line simply read, "An opportunity you might be interested in." I opened the email cautiously, already expecting some kind of offer to drag me back into the world I'd fought so hard to leave behind. But what I found was something different. "Josh, I've been following your recent work, impressive stuff. It's clear you've found your voice again, and I think we might be able to use someone like you. I'm producing a new show. Not the typical fluff you're used to from morning television, but real, hard-hitting investigative journalism. The kind that actually makes a difference. We want to focus on uncovering the stories no one else will touch, the stories that make people uncomfortable because they're too close to the truth. I know you've stepped away from the spotlight, and I respect that. But I think this could be different. You'd have full editorial control. No corporate influence. No anchors feeding you prepackaged lines. Just you, doing what you do best, exposing the truth. Let's talk if you're interested." Jordan. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as a flood of old memories surged back. Jordan was someone I trusted, one of the few people in the industry who still cared about the integrity of journalism. His offer was tempting, more than I wanted to admit. A chance to return to TV, but on my terms this time. I closed the laptop and sat back, the weight of the decision settling over me. For months, I'd been working in the shadows, satisfied with small, meaningful stories. But this could be bigger. The kind of platform I'd always dreamed of before everything had gone off the rails. But it also meant stepping back into the world I'd left behind. Was I ready for that? I spent the next few days thinking about Jordan's offer. It gnawed at me, the possibility of returning to TV, but in a way that felt genuine. There was no doubt that part of me missed the adrenaline of live broadcasting, the rush of knowing that millions of people were watching, waiting for your next word. But at the same time, I was hesitant. The scars from my past life still ran deep, and I didn't want to fall back into old habits. It was Ryan who finally gave me the clarity I needed. We were sitting in the press room, our usual spot, when I brought up the offer. "So," I said, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly, "I got an email from Jordan Matthews. He wants me to do a show. Investigative stuff. Total editorial control." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "And you're actually thinking about it?" I sighed. "I don't know. Part of me is. It's tempting, you know? Being back on TV, but without the network BS. It could be something real." He nodded slowly. "Sounds like a good opportunity. But is it what you want?" That was the question, wasn't it? Was this really about the work, or was it my ego wanting to step back into the spotlight? I had spent so long running from that life, convinced that it was toxic, that going back felt like a betrayal of everything I'd rebuilt. "I just don't want to fall into the same trap," I admitted. "It's easy to get lost in the fame, the attention. That's what happened with the show. I became someone I didn't like." Ryan looked at me, thoughtful. "You're not that person anymore, Josh. You've changed. You've got perspective now. If you're worried about slipping back into old habits, maybe that's a sign you've learned from it." I considered his words. He was right. I had changed. I wasn't the same guy who had let the show, the fame, and Kate's betrayal define him. I had fought my way out of that hole and built something new. Maybe I could use that experience to do something meaningful this time. Look, Ryan continued, the fact that you're even questioning it means you're already on the right track. If you take this, it's because you want to make a difference, not because you need the validation. You got control now. I nodded, feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't expected. He was right. This was my chance to do something good, to step back into the world that had once consumed me, but to do it on my terms. That night, I called Jordan. He picked up after a couple of rings, his voice as confident and smooth as I remembered. Josh, he said, glad to hear from you. I take it you've thought it over? I have, I replied, my voice steady. And I'm in, but I have one condition. Name it, he said without hesitation. I get full control. No interference from sponsors, no corporate nonsense. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Jordan didn't miss a beat. You got it. Welcome aboard. When I hung up, there was no sense of dread or doubt. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, excitement. Real excitement. This was the beginning of something new, not just for my career, but for me as a person. I was no longer the guy standing in the shadow of a scandal, defined by a broken marriage and a ruined career. I was someone who had fought his way through the wreckage and come out stronger on the other side. I stared out at the city skyline from my apartment window, watching as the lights flickered on in the distance. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And this time, I was ready for whatever came next. The set was a far cry from the glossy studios I'd once called home. Instead of sleek marble desks and bright, artificial lights, we had something raw, stripped down. A table, a couple of cameras, and a bare-bones crew. It was perfect. This wasn't about appearances, it was about substance. As I stood behind the scenes, watching the crew make final adjustments, I felt a surge of anticipation. This was it, the culmination of months of planning, research, and late-night discussions. I wasn't just another talking head anymore. This was my show, my story, and for the first time, I wasn't performing for an audience. I was revealing the truth. 5 minutes to air, one of the producers called out. I took a deep breath, adjusting the mic on my jacket. The nerves were there, but it wasn't the fear of messing up. It was the weight of what we were about to uncover. We weren't here to sugarcoat anything or toe the corporate line. We were here to tell the stories no one else would touch. Tonight's episode was the beginning of something much bigger. The investigation we were airing had taken weeks of digging, and what we found was explosive. It wasn't just another corruption scandal or some overblown political drama. This went deep, into the core of the media, into the very institutions that people trusted to deliver the truth. As the minutes ticked down, I replayed the conversations Ryan and I had with our sources. The government cover-up, the shadowy corporations pulling strings, the suppression of key information to manipulate the public. The facts were irrefutable, and yet, every step of the way, we'd faced pressure to drop the story. People didn't want this truth to come out. But this was exactly why I had agreed to do the show. This was the kind of journalism that mattered. Josh, Ryan's voice came from behind me, pulling me out of my thoughts. He stepped up beside me, holding a stack of papers. You ready for this? I glanced at the papers, knowing they held the final rundown for the show. But we both knew the script didn't matter. This was live, raw, and unpredictable. I've never been more ready, I replied, and I meant it. The old Josh, the one who had played it safe on morning television, was gone. In his place stood someone willing to face the fallout, no matter how messy it got. Good, Ryan said with a nod. Because once this goes live, there's no turning back. The red light on the camera blinked to life, signaling we were alive. I leaned forward, facing the camera head-on, and began to speak. Good evening. I'm Josh Daniels, and tonight, we're going to show you something that the major networks, the corporations, and even the government don't want you to see. We've spent weeks uncovering the truth, and what we found was more than just negligence. It was deliberate, calculated deception, designed to keep the public in the dark. My voice was steady, the words flowing easily. This wasn't about drama or sensationalism. It was about exposing what others had worked so hard to bury. We've spoken to whistleblowers, examined classified documents, and tonight, we're going to reveal the full scope of the cover-up. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Because if we can't trust the institutions that are supposed to protect us, then we need to ask ourselves, who can we trust? The screen behind me flickered to life, showing a series of documents, leaked emails, memos, and reports that laid out the entire conspiracy. We had the evidence, and now the world was seeing it. As the segment played, detailing the corruption that had wormed its way into every level of the system, I kept my eyes on the camera. I wasn't just speaking to the viewers. I was speaking to the people responsible. They were watching too, no doubt planning how to discredit us the moment the episode ended. The phone in my pocket buzzed, but I ignored it. Calls were already coming in, from lawyers, from PR teams, from everyone trying to do damage control. But I didn't care. Let them panic. The truth was out now, and there was no stopping it. After the show wrapped, the studio fell silent. The adrenaline still buzzed through my veins as I stood there, watching the credits roll on the monitor. The crew exchanged looks, their faces a mix of excitement and tension. We had just dropped a bombshell, and the fallout was inevitable. Ryan approached, his expression unreadable. "We did it." "Yeah," I said, exhaling slowly. "We did." But as the initial high faded, a new feeling crept in, something darker. More uncertain. We had poked the bear, and now we had to deal with the consequences. This wasn't just a story that would blow over in a few news cycles. This was going to get ugly. My phone buzzed again, and this time, I pulled it out. It was a text from Claire, the senior producer who had visited me months ago. "Josh, I just saw the show. Be careful. People are talking, and it's not good. Call me." I stared at the message, my gut twisting. I had expected pushback, but Claire's warning felt more urgent than I had anticipated. I glanced at Ryan, who was gathering his notes. He noticed the look on my face. "Something wrong?" I showed him the message. His eyes narrowed, but he shrugged. "We knew this would happen. They're scared." We hit a nerve. "Yeah," I said slowly, pocketing my phone. "But how scared are they?" Later that night, after everyone had cleared out and the studio was dark, I sat alone at my desk, the glow from my laptop casting a soft light across the room. The world outside continued as it always did, unaware of the storm that was about to break. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. I had thought I was ready for this. I had convinced myself that exposing the truth would be enough, that we could handle whatever came next. But now, sitting in the silence, I wasn't so sure. There were powerful people out there, people with influence, money, and resources. People who wouldn't hesitate to protect their interests, no matter the cost. And I had just put a target on my back. As I stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I realized that the real battle was only just beginning. We had exposed the lie, but the fight for the truth was far from over. And this time, it wasn't just my career on the line. It was everything. The morning after the broadcast, the world felt different. I woke up with a strange sense of clarity, but beneath it was an unmistakable tension. My phone had already buzzed itself off the nightstand by the time I got up. Calls, texts, emails, everyone was trying to get a piece of me. I didn't need to check to know what was happening. The storm had hit, and it wasn't going away anytime soon. I sat up and stared at the ceiling, letting the reality of the situation sink in. We had done it. We'd aired the story that no one else had the guts to touch. But now, we were in uncharted territory. This wasn't just another news cycle we could ride out. What we'd revealed had shaken things up, badly. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the notifications. Headlines from every major outlet had picked up our story, some calling it the most explosive exposé in recent memory, others already casting doubt. A few attacked my credibility outright, dredging up old scandals, and painting me as a disgruntled ex-anchor with a vendetta. I sighed. This was expected. The media machine was doing what it did best, creating noise and confusion. They couldn't dispute the facts, so they were attacking the messenger. But it wasn't just the press. Several missed calls were from unknown numbers. I sat down across from him. "You said we needed to talk." Jordan leaned in slightly, his voice low. "Josh, you're a smart guy. You know what's happening right now, right?" I nodded. "We rattled the cage. People are scared." "Scared is an understatement," he said, glancing around the cafe, even though there was no one close enough to hear. "I've been getting calls all morning. Not from journalists. From people in high places. They're not happy, Josh." "Good," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "That means we're doing something right." Jordan gave me a hard look. "This isn't a game, Josh. You've pissed off the wrong people. I've had producers calling me, telling me to pull the episode from every platform." I've had legal teams breathing down my neck, threatening lawsuits. And that's just the beginning. He took a sip of his coffee, his expression unreadable. You need to be careful. These people, they don't play by the same rules as the rest of us. They'll come after you, and they won't stop until you're silenced. I leaned back, feeling a flicker of anger. I'm not backing down, Jordan. This story needed to be told, and we told it. I'm not going to be bullied into silence. Jordan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I know, and that's why I'm here. Look, I respect what you're doing, but you need to understand what's at stake. This isn't just about your career anymore. It's about your safety. I stared at him, the weight of his words settling in. Part of me had known this was coming. We'd exposed powerful people. People with resources, connections, and the kind of influence that could crush anyone who stood in their way. But I hadn't fully realized what that meant until now. Jordan's voice softened. I've seen this before, Josh. When you go after people at this level, they don't just try to ruin your career. They ruin your life. They come after your family, your friends. They'll dig up every piece of dirt they can find, or they'll make something up if they have to. And if that doesn't work, they'll find other ways to deal with you. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Claire's warning from the night before flashed through my head. People are talking, and it's not good. Are you saying I should walk away? I asked, my voice tinged with frustration. No, Jordan said quickly. I'm saying you need to be smart. This story is bigger than you, and they know it. That's why they're panicking. But if you're going to keep pushing, you need to protect yourself. How? I asked, feeling a sense of helplessness creeping in. Jordan leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You need to get out ahead of them. Start building alliances with people who have the power to back you up. Lawyers, other journalists, anyone who can help protect you when they come after you. Because trust me, they will. I nodded, the reality of what I had stepped into becoming clearer by the second. I had thought exposing the truth would be the hard part. But now I was realizing that keeping myself, and everyone I cared about, safe in the aftermath was going to be even harder. Jordan's phone buzzed on the table, pulling him out of the conversation. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. I have to go, he said, standing up abruptly. But listen to me, Josh. You got a fight ahead of you. And it's going to get ugly. As he turned to leave, he stopped and looked back at me. Be ready. They're not going to stop until they've taken you down. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall, Jordan's words echoing in my head. I had known from the start that this wasn't going to be easy. But I hadn't anticipated just how personal the fallout would become. I wasn't just fighting for the truth anymore, I was fighting for my life, my reputation, and everything I had left. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over Ryan's name. I needed to talk to him, to figure out our next move. But before I could press call, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. Hello? There was a pause, then a low, unfamiliar voice. You think you're untouchable, Josh? You're not. Stop what you're doing, or we'll make sure you regret it. The line went dead. I sat there, gripping the phone in my hand, the weight of the threat sinking in. They weren't bluffing. This was real, and they were coming for me. For the next few hours, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the unknown voice on the other end of that call, the cold certainty in their words. The warning was clear, back off, or suffer the consequences. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. I grabbed my laptop and began typing furiously, sending emails to every contact I had in the industry. If they were going to come after me, I was going to make sure I had an army behind me. It wasn't just about survival, it was about making sure the truth didn't get buried again. I had fought too hard and come too far to let them silence me now. The next day, I awoke to a flood of emails and messages. Some were supportive, others were outright threats. The story had gained traction overnight, and the world was reacting. For every journalist, activist, or concerned citizen praising me for exposing the truth, there were just as many critics calling me a fraud, a liar, or worse. But that didn't matter anymore. I had already crossed the point of no return. What did matter was the phone call I had received the night before. The cold, ominous voice was still echoing in my head. Stop what you're doing, or we'll make sure you regret it. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My apartment felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in on me. I checked the locks twice before sitting down at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. I needed to talk to someone, Ryan, maybe. But what could I say? Telling him I'd been threatened would only make him panic, and we were already in deep enough. Instead, I opened my laptop and scanned the news. The backlash was intensifying. Multiple outlets were now running stories questioning the validity of our investigation. Some were even calling it a sensationalized hit piece, painting me as a disgruntled former morning show host who had gone rogue. Typical. They were attacking my credibility, trying to discredit everything we'd uncovered. But we had the proof, the documents, the whistleblowers. The truth was on our side. But truth alone wasn't going to be enough to win this battle. A notification popped up, a message from Claire, the senior producer who had warned me a few days earlier. "Josh, I heard about the threats. We need to talk. Meet me tonight. I stared at the message, feeling my stomach tighten. I hadn't told Claire about the phone call. How did she know? I typed a quick reply, agreeing to meet her at a diner just outside the city. It was quiet, out of the way, and less likely to draw attention. As I sat there, the paranoia continued to gnaw at me. Claire wasn't someone I could fully trust. She was too close to the media machine we had just taken down. But she had been one of the few who'd warned me early on. Maybe she had some inside information that could help. That evening, I arrived at the diner a few minutes early. The place was nearly empty, a single waitress moving between tables. I took a seat by the window, where I could see the parking lot. Claire arrived shortly after, wearing a black coat and sunglasses, like she was trying to go unnoticed. She slid into the booth across from me, glancing around nervously before speaking. "Josh, this is worse than I thought." I raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" She leaned in, her voice low. "The people you've exposed, they're not just going to ruin your career. They're going to destroy you, in every way they can. And they've got connections in places you can't even imagine. Political, corporate, and even law enforcement. They're already moving to shut you down." I sat back, trying to process what she was saying. "You're saying they're untouchable?" Claire sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'm saying they have more power than you realize. I've seen them do it before. They'll smear you, bankrupt you, and if that doesn't work, they'll find other ways to make sure you stop." The threat from last night rang in my ears again. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to protect yourself," she said firmly. "Get a legal team. Get security. And for God's sake, be careful who you trust." I nodded, though my mind was already racing. "And you? Why are you helping me?" Claire hesitated, her eyes darting toward the window as if she was expecting someone to burst in. "Because I know what it's like to be in your position. I tried to expose a story like this years ago. But I backed down, and they destroyed everything. I don't want to see the same thing happen to you." Her words hung in the air, and I realized she wasn't just giving me advice. She was confessing. This wasn't just about my story. It was about redemption, for her and for everyone who had been silenced before me. We left the diner separately, each of us glancing over our shoulders. As I drove home, Claire's warning echoed in my mind. They had the power to ruin me, and they weren't going to stop until I was either discredited or silenced for good. But I wasn't going to let that happen. When I got home, I locked the door and immediately started contacting lawyers and security firms. If they were going to come after me, I needed to be ready. But I also knew that lawyers and security could only do so much. I had to outmaneuver them and stay one step ahead. The fight was just beginning. The next few days were a whirlwind of damage control. My legal team was doing everything they could to shield me from the lawsuits that had started piling up, but the pressure was mounting. The smear campaigns were relentless. Every day, new headlines emerged questioning my credibility, dragging up old rumors, and twisting facts. But I wasn't the only one under fire. Ryan, who had been right by my side throughout the investigation, was getting hit too. His family had started receiving strange phone calls. And someone had tried to hack into his email. It was clear that the people we had exposed were playing dirty, and they were escalating. One night, as I sat in front of my laptop, trying to piece together our next move, my phone buzzed. It was Ryan. "Josh, we've got a problem," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They're going after my family." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" "They've been getting calls, threats. They're scared, Josh. And I don't know how much more of this they can take." I closed my eyes, guilt washing over me. Ryan had stood by me through everything, but now his family was being dragged into this mess. "I'm sorry, man. I didn't think." "It's not your fault," Ryan interrupted. "But we need to be smart about this. We're hitting them hard, and they're hitting back even harder. We can't afford to make any mistakes. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. What do you suggest? Ryan hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I think we need to push harder. We've got more evidence, stuff we didn't air yet. We hit them with everything we've got, force them to back off. It was risky. If we pushed too hard, they could crush us. But if we didn't, they would continue to dismantle our lives piece by piece. All right, I said, determination settling in my chest. Let's do it. We'll release everything. The following morning, we prepared for the second wave. Ryan and I worked through the night, organizing all the files, emails, and documents we had uncovered but hadn't yet made public. It was a treasure trove of damning evidence, and once we released it, there would be no going back. But just as we were about to publish the final piece, I received an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line was simple. Final warning. I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. Walk away now, Josh. If you don't, we will make sure you never see your family again. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't just a threat anymore, it was a promise. They had crossed a line. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. They had already gone after Ryan's family. Now they were coming for mine. I couldn't let that happen. But I also couldn't let them win. I picked up the phone and called Ryan. When he answered, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. We have to move now, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and resolve. Release everything. Ryan hesitated, then spoke quietly. Are you sure, Josh? If we do this, there's no turning back. I glanced at the email again. The threat burning in my mind. I'm sure, I said, my voice hardening. We've come too far to back down now. Hours later, the second wave of our investigation hit the airwaves. We released everything, the emails, the hidden transactions, the secret meetings. It was all there, undeniable and unfiltered. The backlash was immediate. The media erupted in chaos, and the people we had exposed were scrambling to contain the damage. But for the first time, I felt a sense of victory. They had tried to silence me. But I had fought back, and the truth was out there for everyone to see. But even as the storm raged, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The fight was far from over, and I had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The trap had been set, and now I had to wait for them to make their next move. And I knew they would. The hours after the second wave aired were a blur. Phone calls came in from every corner, reporters, lawyers, even old friends who had stayed silent until now. The response was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, I felt a rush of satisfaction. We had done it. The truth was out, and there was no going back. But I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. As the headlines flashed across my screen, my phone buzzed again. It was Claire. Josh, you need to listen to me carefully, she said, her voice tight with urgency. They're planning something. I just heard from a source inside one of the networks. This isn't over. What do you mean? I asked, my stomach tightening. They're coming after you. Legally, personally. Everything. The people we expose aren't going to sit back and let this play out in the media. They're pulling strings behind the scenes, and they've got people in their pockets, law enforcement, judges, maybe even your own legal team. Her words sent a chill down my spine. You think they're going to try to frame me? I don't think, Josh. I know. Claire's voice was firm. They're going to fabricate evidence, spin stories. Make it look like you're the one who's been corrupt all along. They'll use everything they can to take you down. I felt the walls closing in around me again. They were powerful, and they were willing to use any means necessary to protect themselves. But now they were going to make it personal. What do I do? I asked, though I already knew the answer. You need to stay ahead of them. Prepare for the worst. Get your own investigators, dig into everything, your legal team, your friends. Anyone who could be compromised. And don't trust anyone unless you're absolutely sure they're on your side. Her warning hung in the air, and as soon as the call ended, I knew she was right. They had tried to scare me, and when that didn't work, they moved to the next phase: discredit, destroy, erase. I called Ryan immediately. They're going to hit us harder than before, I said, pacing the room. They're planning to frame me, Ryan. They'll make it look like we're the corrupt ones. Are you serious? Ryan sounded shocked, though not entirely surprised. Do you think they can pull it off? They've got the power, the connections. They'll make up whatever story they need. We need to counteract them before they get the chance. Ryan was silent for a moment. We've got the files, Josh. We've got backup copies of everything. If they come after you, we can release more proof. Show the world exactly what they're doing. I hope you're right, I said, though the doubt gnawed at me. Because this fight isn't over. It's only just starting. That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside felt like a threat, every shadow in the corner of my apartment like an approaching danger. I kept thinking about Claire's warning, about the anonymous phone calls, about how close I was to losing everything. The next morning, the hammer dropped. I was woken up by a loud knock at the door. Groggy and disoriented, I stumbled to answer it, only to be met by two men in suits, their badges flashing before I could even register what was happening. Josh Fisher? You're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The words hit me like a freight train. My heart pounded in my chest as they pulled my hands behind my back and slapped cuffs on me. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered, my voice thick with disbelief. This is a setup, but they didn't care. The men were professionals, stone-faced and silent as they read me my rights and escorted me out of the building. As we walked to the car, I saw neighbors peeking out from their windows. Cameras flashing in the distance. The media was already on this. At the station, the interrogation began. They laid out their fabricated case against me. Documents showing money transferred into accounts I'd never seen, emails that had clearly been doctored, and witnesses they claimed had proof of my involvement in illegal deals. It was an airtight setup. I could see how the pieces were falling into place. They had orchestrated everything, making it look like I had been the one pulling the strings behind the corruption all along. But they had underestimated me. As soon as I was allowed my one phone call, I contacted my new legal team. These weren't the compromised lawyers Claire had warned me about. These were people I had personally vetted, fighters who weren't afraid to go up against the giants. We've got to move fast, I told them. Get the backup files from Ryan. There's a paper trail that will expose what they've done. We need to show the world who's really behind this. The days that followed were a blur of courtrooms, interviews, and endless legal battles. My new lawyers worked tirelessly, and I was in constant contact with Ryan, who was helping coordinate our next moves. We were playing a dangerous game, but I wasn't going to let them win without a fight. Meanwhile, the media circus continued to swirl around me. Every day, new allegations surfaced. They had gone all out, digging up dirt from years ago, fabricating lies, doing everything in their power to ruin my name. But we were ready. We fought back with everything we had, releasing documents, files, and recordings that proved their corruption, showing how they had manipulated the system for years. Finally, after weeks of tension, something shifted. The tide began to turn. Public opinion was starting to change, as more people saw through the lies and deception. Journalists who had initially been skeptical of my story were now coming forward with their own findings, backing up what Ryan and I had uncovered. One night, as I sat in my apartment, exhausted but still fighting, I got a call from Claire. "Josh, it's happening," she said, her voice breathless with excitement. "They're starting to collapse. Some of their people are flipping, turning on them to save themselves. You've got them on the ropes." I could hardly believe it. After everything, after all the threats, the smear campaigns, the arrests, they were finally cracking under the pressure. The day of my final court hearing came, and the tension was palpable. The courtroom was packed with reporters, lawyers, and onlookers, all waiting to see how it would end. I sat beside my legal team, feeling the weight of months of fighting on my shoulders. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. As the trial unfolded, my lawyers presented our evidence, proof that I had been framed, that the people we had exposed were behind everything. The judge listened carefully, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker across his face. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge gave his ruling. "You are hereby cleared of all charges." The words hit me like a wave of relief. I could hardly believe it. I had won. I had survived. But victory didn't come without a cost. The fallout from the investigation had left scars, on my career, on my relationships, on my trust in the system. Ryan and I both knew that things would never be the same. We had taken on a powerful machine, and while we had come out on top, the battle had changed us. As I stood outside the courthouse, the sun shining down on me, I realized that this was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. The truth was out, and justice had been served. But the fight for transparency, for accountability, wasn't over. It never would be. I had won the battle, but the war for the truth would rage on. And I would be ready for it.